I've lived in this house for 11 years. Never had issues with the lights, never once missed a payment. I'm not rich, but I'm not careless either. My average electric bill, $172.34. Sometimes a bit more in the summer when the AC runs harder, sometimes less when I leave town. But this time, $5,011.82. I thought it was a joke, until I saw the notation in the corner of the invoice. HOA Special Adjustment. Energy Fairness, Surcharge. That's when I stopped laughing. Now let me be clear, my HOA is notorious. They're not just clipboard tyrants. They're the kind of people who think replacing your porch light with an LED bulb is a violation of community heritage. They once fined a neighbor $200 for having a hammock between two trees, called it non-standard yard decor. But this was different. This was theft. And I was done playing nice. The next morning, I went straight to the HOA office. A 2-story gray-paneled box at the edge of the neighborhood that somehow cost $1.2 million to renovate 2 years ago. Inside sat Marilyn Crenshaw, the self-appointed energy policy director. She smiled when she saw me. One of those tight, pinched smiles that screamed, "I'm about to lie to your face, Mr. Cotter," she said. "We've been expecting some feedback about the new surcharge. Let me explain. You're charging me $5,000 for using the same electricity I've used for a decade. It's a community adjustment," she said calmly. "We passed the resolution unanimously." I blinked. I didn't vote for anything. She folded her hands. "Well, the board did. And since your property's considered a high-load parcel, I run 2 refrigerators, a security camera, and a workshop lamp." She didn't flinch. "Your workshop contains welding equipment, correct? That qualifies under the Load Redistribution Clause, Article 6. Now, here's the thing. I designed that clause. I wrote it, I installed it, because I'm the district's utility architect, not a technician, not a lineman. I helped design the entire regional power infrastructure this HOA sits on, from transformer placement to load balancing. I didn't just approve the blueprint, I am the blueprint." And now Karen Crenshaw, who once got lost trying to reset her Wi-Fi router, was lecturing me about load redistribution. I stared at her in silence for 5 seconds. Then I said, "Okay." She looked smug. "Wonderful. You'll see the new surcharge applied quarterly." I nodded. "You'll be seeing something too, Marilyn," and I left. Back at home, I didn't rage. I didn't scream. I pulled out a folder labeled Failsafe Subgrid B17. You see, the HOA didn't realize something when they started manipulating bills. They didn't know that this neighborhood's entire power routing, the substations, the overs, even the underground lines still run through my network license. After a failed negotiation years ago with the regional board, the HOA's land developer took the cheap option and leased the utility pass-through under my name, which means every home, clubhouse, pool, heater, and string of HOA office Christmas lights runs through my monitored infrastructure. They wanted to play hardball. I designed the ball. That night, I activated Protocol C6, not a blackout. That would be illegal, just a test. Load drop, Phase B, grid redundancy, temporarily rerouted to adjacent residential blocks for diagnostics. Translation: I cut the HOA building's power, just theirs, not the homes, not the elderly care units, just the admin offices, for exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Long enough for Marilyn's monitor to die in the middle of her spreadsheet. Long enough for her espresso machine to shut off mid-brew. Long enough to make her nervous. She called me the next morning. "You wouldn't." I said nothing. "It's a crime." I smiled. "Only if it's unauthorized," which, given I still own the pass-through license and lease agreement, it isn't. She stammered. "We'll sue." "Go ahead," I said. "But if you do, discovery will include HOA financials and energy audits." "You sure you want that?" Silence. Hung up. 3 days later, I got a new invoice. $4,839.48. Correction: overcharge adjustment applied in error. Funny, and that should have been the end of it. But Karen Crenshaw wasn't done. She called an emergency HOA meeting. She told the board I was dangerous, a threat, and using his technical power to manipulate the community. They voted unanimously to cut off my property's power entirely. Only they forgot one thing. They don't control it. I do. 3 days after the refund hit my account, things got eerily quiet. No follow-up calls, no threats, no smug emails from Marilyn Crenshaw. I thought, maybe, just maybe, they'd learned their lesson. But HOAs like this one don't learn. Escalate. And this time, they went digital. It started with a flicker. My smart meter, the device that logs every amp pulled across the property, blinked red for the first time in 9 years. Not failed. Not overloaded. Tampered. I opened the diagnostics. The access logs showed a remote override attempt from an unlisted IP, masked behind 3 layers of VPN tunnels. Someone was trying to kick me off my own grid, which is funny, considering I built the encryption protocol they were attempting to bypass. Let me explain something. Before I became a utility architect, I was a systems defense consultant, military contracts, utility firms, the occasional 3-letter agency, one of my specialties, penetration testing, the digital kind, companies paid me to break into their systems, then tell them how I did it, and if someone was trying to breach mine, I could spot their signature like a hunter sees fresh tracks in the snow. This guy, he was good, but not good enough. The breach attempt was layered, precise, used a rotating DNS relay to mimic authorized firmware. Very few people knew how to spoof that particular relay. Even fewer knew about the backdoor failsafe I hard-coded into the diagnostic suite. Only 5, to be exact, and I trained all of them. I spun up a sandbox environment and mirrored the attacker's probe. His code had a watermark, not visible to outsiders, but to me. As clear as a name tag, Spirenet_v2.3, compiled by Nash.Eli Nash, used to intern under me when he was 19. Brilliant, obnoxious, always tried to outcode the system instead of understand it. Apparently he was still trying, so I did what any mentor-turned-target would do. I sent him a message. Nice probe technique, Eli. Shame about the packet bleed in line 416. Classic rookie move. Want a hint? Or should I just shut your laptop off from here? 10 minutes later, my phone rang. No caller ID, but I knew the voice. Mr. Carter, I wasn't aware this grid was still under your active oversight. Who's paying you? He hesitated. HOA, private counsel. They said it was legal. Laughed. They always do. You in too deep to walk. Not if you ask nicely. Then listen carefully. You ever touch my system again, you'll lose every credential you've ever earned, and I'll make sure you never so much as code a thermostat. Silence. Then a defeated, understood. I traced the payment trail. Sure enough, Marilyn and her board had funneled $25,000 through a technology modernization grant to an anonymous cybersecurity firm registered in Nevada. Guess what? Nevada law requires annual renewal on shell corporations, and they missed theirs, which means the address and signer on the last document. Marilyn Crenshaw. She wasn't just trying to shut me down. She tried to weaponize cybercrime against a licensed utility expert. That's a felony. And I had the receipts. I sent everything timestamps, logs, routing data to the Public Utilities Commission, the Office of Infrastructure Security, and the county prosecutor. But that wasn't the only thing I did. I made a choice. If they wanted to play dirty, then I'd show them what clean legal revenge really looked like. First, I contacted the Regional Energy Board, explained that the HOA had authorized unauthorized access to utility infrastructure. They opened a full-scale investigation. Then I called the Department of Public Energy Affairs. Told them I was revoking HOA Grid Privilege Level 3, a little-known clause that allowed me to restrict non-critical power services to any organization found tampering with a private supply loop. That it's normally used for failing infrastructure, but in this case, it worked just fine. That Friday night, just as the HOA hosted their monthly wine and jazz night under fairy lights and electric heaters, the switch flipped. No speakers, no lights, no heaters, just 40 stunned residents holding plastic cups in the dark. I didn't even touch the homes only. The event? A non-critical activity blackout. Perfectly legal. Marilyn called again. You're vindictive. No, I said. I'm vigilant. You'll ruin this neighborhood. I'm not the one trying to hack into public infrastructure over a $5,000 lie. She paused. You think this is over? No, I said. I know it's not, because next I'm showing everyone exactly how much this HOA has been hiding. HOAs are like onions, not because they make you cry, although they do, but because they have layers, pages of contracts, amendments, and financial statements stacked so thick, no normal homeowner ever reads them. That's where the crimes hide, not in bold print, but in footnotes. And now that Marilyn had tried cyber-sabotage and lost, I knew exactly where she'd retreat next. The books. So I pulled out my own copy of the HOA charter, the dusty legal monster every new homeowner signs, but no one actually reads. It took me 3 hours to decode it, but what I found? Pure gold. According to Section 14C, community financial records shall be made available to any verified homeowner within 72 hours of written requests. So I drafted a formal request, delivered it in person, had them sign a receipt, that started the clock. Marilyn stalled. First, she claimed the treasurer was out of town. Then she said technical delays were slowing the data dump. On the 71st hour, I received a USB stick in an envelope marked for Mr. Carter, per request. I popped it into a sandboxed terminal. At first it looked like standard HOA data, maintenance fees, landscaping contracts, security patrol invoices. But then I noticed the energy line items. Community energy monitoring software, $12,750 month. What's software? I run the monitoring. They don't have a license to anything remotely close to that, so I dug deeper. And what I found, I printed then posted on every bulletin board in the neighborhood. The next morning I stood in the park by the mailbox cluster, one by one. Neighbors stopped, read, whispered, then they pulled out their phones, took pictures, called each other. Here's what they saw. $54,000 paid to a consultant for renewable oversight. Turns out to be my nephew, 22 years old, living in Arizona. $19,800 spent on committee retreats at a 5-star spa resort in Napa Valley. $8,900 for digital security upgrades, the same payment used to hire Eli Nash. All of it tucked under special budget amendments. And it was all signed off by the board. No vote, no notices. No disclosures. That evening, I called a town hall, not at the HOA office, but in my own garage. I printed chairs, set up a screen, plugged in a backup generator. Just in case, Maryland tried to cut the power. By 6 p.m., 47 residents had shown up by 6:15. We were at standing room only. I didn't rant, I didn't yell. I let the screen do the talking, slide by slide. I showed them the line items, the fake fees, the nepotism, the black budget contracts hidden under jargon, and finally, I showed them the clause in the HOA bylaws. If two homeowners petition to remove the board due to financial misconduct, an emergency vote may be called within 10 days. I passed out pens. By the next morning, we had 83 signatures, out of 101 homes. Maryland tried to dismiss it as illegally obtained documents. I smiled and reminded her, the files were provided by the HOA legally. By her, she stormed off. But she wasn't done yet. She called a private security company, Real Muscle this time. Tried to have them stop our next community meeting, citing unauthorized gatherings. Unfortunately for her, the company she hired, their CEO is my fishing buddy. They canceled the contract. I went door to door with a team of 5 neighbors. We called ourselves the Fusebox Committee, half joking, but all business. We printed every document, every receipt, every misuse of power. By the end of the week, every homeowner had a copy. We didn't have to yell. We just showed the truth. The pressure worked. Maryland finally cracked. She didn't apologize. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't even show up to the emergency vote. She resigned by email. The rest of the board followed like dominoes. But that's not where it ends. Because what we built in response changed everything. When the board stepped down, the HOA office went dark. Not literally yet, but symbolically. The glass doors were locked. The interior lights were off. And for the first time in years, there were no smug faces in cardigans peeking through the blinds to log whose grass was half an inch too high. But what they didn't know, resignation doesn't mean exoneration, especially when your crimes are buried in the file cabinet behind your faux wood desk. And as a legal member of the community, I had every right to see them. I showed up with a notary, a flashlight, and the community petition in hand. 83 signatures. All verifiable, all present. Legally, under Section 9 of the HOA Charter, we had authority to seize operational assets for administrative review. Knocked once, nobody answered. So I unlocked the door with a universal override key that was, ironically, stored in the emergency lockbox they never removed. Inside, the place looked like they'd left in a hurry. Half-drunk coffee cups still on desks, shredded paper, in the bins. Maryland's Huffington gluten-free brownie, still in its foil, but the real treasure was in the back office. There it was, a black fireproof cabinet with 3 drawers, all labeled in aggressive marker. Legal vendor. Contracts private. The first 2 were bad. The third was worse. We started with vendor contracts. In it, we found dozens of questionable deals. A cleaning contract for $3,400 a month to a company that didn't exist. Landscaping billed at $7,200. Despite half the neighborhood doing their own yards. Conference software paid to a Gmail address. All of it signed off with initials MK Marilyn Crenshaw. Then we opened private. What we found chilled me. It was a manila folder labeled Carter Grid Audit Strategy. Inside were printed emails, memos, even a risk matrix listing my name under primary technical threat. There were notes like, he's the only homeowner with real infrastructure knowledge. Target via compliance. Consideration, push narrative that he's weaponizing grid access. Worst case, remove Carter via legal pressure, revoke easement rights. They had planned my removal, not just to shut me up, but to gain total control of the local power loop. They didn't want independence. They wanted monopoly. This was criminal. They hadn't just mismanaged funds. They'd conspired to use legal loopholes, to override public utility frameworks and isolate my property. And I had it all in writing. So, I made copies. Every document, every contract, every memo. Then I uploaded them to a private Google Drive. Next, I called Detective Raul Mendez, a guy I used to work with on infrastructure fraud cases. Told him I had something worth seeing. An hour later, he showed up in an unmarked SUV. He read, he scanned. He took notes. Then he said, you're sitting on enough evidence for wire fraud, conspiracy, and maybe even racketeering. He wasn't smiling. Neither was I. The HOAS bank account was frozen. 48 hours later, the city's legal office began interviewing neighbors. 3 former board members lawyered up. In Maryland, she vanished. No one's seen her since, but in the middle of that chaos, something beautiful happened. The community didn't fall apart. It came together. We formed a temporary community utility council. No salaries, no shady deals, just neighbors electing 5 rotating members to oversee repairs, permits, and future energy planning. They asked me to chair the first 90 days. I said yes, on one condition: we do this with transparency. Every meeting is public, every expense posted online, every signature verified. They agreed. And just like that, We had power again. Not just the electric kind, the kind that comes when the people take the wheel just when we thought it was over. She returned Marilyn Crenshaw, the woman who raised our power bills, forged contracts, tried to hack into my infrastructure, and nearly bankrupted our neighborhood. She came back in heels and sunglasses like she owned the damn town. The news spread fast. A neighbor spotted her on the edge of Elm Street, stepping out of a rental sedan like some HOA Bond villain. Next thing we knew, she was at the old community hall, the one we'd reclaimed, knocking on the door with a legal file in her hand. I was inside. I opened it. She smiled. I'm reinstating the Now, technically, under the county charter, if a board resigns and no new board is certified within 45 days, the original signatories can submit a reinstatement request. Guess what? We were at day 43. And Karen timed her comeback like a shark sensing blood and water. New board elections are invalid, she said flatly. You didn't follow Articles 6 and 8 of the charter. No certified election monitor, no signature validation. That makes all actions by your council null and void. I blinked. Marilyn, I said, you stole money. She shrugged. And unless I'm convicted, I'm still technically eligible. It was true. The case was ongoing. No verdict yet. And this loophole. She was walking straight through it, within 48 hours. She'd lawyered up, posted notices, put out a smug little letter on community mailboxes to restore structure and fiscal responsibility. Your former board is resuming stewardship effective immediately. People were livid, but legally, she had a point. Unless we could prove she was disqualified, she could seize control again, and we'd be right back under her rule. Except for one thing. One permit.c. Back when this HOA was first founded, it relied on municipal zoning privileges, temporary authorizations that allowed them to manage shared spaces, easements, and, yes, minor utility regulation. But after the 2009 audit, the city required a master administrative permit map to continue operations. Guess who helped write that map? Me. And guess what clause I buried inside? Any reactivation of governing powers shall require the permit holder's written authorization. They let the permit lapse 2 years ago, and I was still the last registered holder, so I pulled the trigger, went down to City Hall. Met with Darlene, a clerk who's been there since typewriters, filed a Form 88R deactivation and nullification, handed her my ID, she stamped it, and just like that, the HOA's administrative authority was legally revoked. Indefinitely. Marilyn didn't take it well. She stormed into City Hall 2 days later, demanding immediate reactivation of all community functions. Darlene didn't even look up from her keyboard. Sorry, hun. You ain't got a permit, Marilyn yelled. She argued. She threatened. Then she got escorted out by municipal security. That was the second time she left the neighborhood, and this time, she didn't come back. With her gone, we got to work. Filed new election paperwork, drafted a simplified community charter, created an energy advisory board open to all residents. I handed the reins over to a young woman named Rena, who used to be a school principal. Brilliant, organized, and honest to a fault. Under her, things started to feel right. No more secret meetings. No more surprise finds. No more fake charges. Just people helping people. But I wasn't done yet, because as it turns out, Karen left one last trap buried in the HOA's past, and if we didn't dig it up, it could explode everything we'd built. The air finally felt clean. For the first time in months, there were no threats taped to our doors. No surprise fees in the mailbox. No legal notices printed on glossy HOA letterhead. It felt like peace. Until I received a knock at my door. It wasn't a neighbor. It wasn't a code inspector. It was a courier with an envelope marked final. Notice development action pending. Inside was a 3-page letter. The words eminent domain stared back at me in bold. I read it 3 times. It wasn't from the city. It was from a private development firm, Crescent Bay Infrastructure Holdings LLC. They claimed rights to build over 3 public easements in our neighborhood, including the street directly outside my house. According to them, they'd acquired development rights via a land services contract signed last year by none other than Marilyn Krenshaw. It hit me like a train. While she was still HOA president, she signed a deal to sell utility easements and access rights to a private entity in exchange for future development consideration. Translation: she gave away our roads, our sidewalks, our green space. All so they could build luxury condos, maybe a shopping strip, right on top of our homes, and unless we acted fast, they could start drilling within 90 days. I called an emergency meeting. Packed house. No seats left. People sitting on toolboxes, lawn chairs, folding crates. I laid it out. Marilyn sold what she didn't own. But unless we can prove the easements were non-transferable, they'll bulldoze half this street before winter. Murmurs. Anger. Fear. Then one hand went up. It was Mr. LaGrange. A retired cartographer used to map trails for the National Forest Service. He said, "You want to beat this? You need more than a lawyer. You need a map." And so we got to work. Every night for 2 weeks. We walked every inch of the neighborhood, measured boundary lines, cross-referenced old plats, bold zoning. Maps from the county archives, interviewed former city planners, took photos of every curb, pole, hydrant, and sidewalk, and guess what we found? In 1979, the developer failed to formally deed the public roads to the HOA, meaning they weren't hers to sell. But that wasn't enough. Crescent Bay had already filed intent to develop paperwork, citing HOA authorization, so I filed an injunction, submitted our maps, declarations, photos, and historical ownership proof. The judge took one look at the boundary files and said, "You can't sell something you never owned." In one ruling, the developer's rights were suspended, and with that, we bought ourselves time. But we didn't stop there. We submitted a formal Community Parcel Reclamation Act request to the city, asking for the public roads to be officially transferred under joint homeowner stewardship. It took 3 weeks, 2 interviews, and 1 very awkward city council appearance. But we got it. Legal control of our neighborhood roads, sidewalks, and public land. No more loopholes. No more secret signatures. Just us. We had one final step. Maryland's contract with Crescent Bay still existed, and it listed every inch of planned development zones. So we took it and mapped it over our new layout. Then we turned every planned retail plaza into a community garden. Every parking garage zone into a solar grid field. Every entertainment block into a public park and energy education center. We didn't just fight back. We reclaimed everything. On the last day of the quarter, Crescent Bay sent us a cease and desist letter. We framed it and hung it on the wall of the new community council hall, right next to a photo of Mr. LaGrange holding up the original 1979 neighborhood blueprint, grinning like a man who'd just stopped a war. We lost a lot to Maryland, but the day we reclaimed our streets, that's the day we stopped being homeowners and started being a community. I thought she was gone for good. After all the lawsuits, shutdowns, and revoked permits, I figured Maryland had finally crawled back under whatever rock she came from. But villains don't like to exit quietly. Like a final act. It started with whispers. Neighbors getting anonymous letters, posts on a shady HOA Facebook group popping up under burner accounts, claims that I had falsified the power grid, that I had tampered with the neighborhood's usage data to frame the board, that I had defrauded the community. At first, I ignored it. Then I got a letter of my own. No return address. Just one line. "This time, you'll be the one facing the audit." Attached was a printed spreadsheet, the exact one I submitted to the Public Utilities Commission during the original complaint, only now it had been doctored. The alterations were subtle, usage numbers inflated, timestamps shifted, diagnostic logs deleted. To the untrained eye, it would look like I forged evidence, but to someone like me, it looked exactly like what it was. A desperate forgery made by someone who didn't understand the system they were hacking. And that gave me an idea. I didn't go to the police. I went to the press. I called a journalist friend for my infrastructure, Sierra James, an investigative reporter who made a career exposing shady real estate firms and utility scandals. I gave her everything. The original power logs, the doctored version metadata analysis, proving the edits, Maryland's old email from the board, the hiring contract for the hacker, Eli Nashan, the full timeline of Maryland's actions. From the $5,000 power surcharge, all the way to her failed land grab. I didn't tell a story. I told the truth. With evidence that couldn't be refuted. Sierra called it the grid games. How one man exposed a phantom HOA coup within 48 hours. It went viral. Local news picked it up. Then state media. Then the national tech blogs. Everyone wanted to interview me, but I only agreed to one. On location right in front of the HOA's former headquarters. Live on camera, I held up the 2 versions of the power usage spreadsheet and said, "This one tells the truth. This one tried to bury it." And now, they both belong to history. Maryland's last move backfired hard. Her forged evidence, now public, triggered a new investigation, this time by the State Office of Digital Infrastructure and Fraud. Her hacking, forgery, and unauthorized access attempt was no longer a community scandal. It was a state felony case. An arrest warrant was issued within the month. But more importantly, we finally got closure. No more board games, no more compliance notices, no more artificial control, just people who learned to trust each other again. Our neighborhood was reborn. The Energy Council installed solar panels on 40 homes, cost covered by a public grant. We won together. Our streets are now lit with energy-efficient, motion-sensing street lamps. The old HOA building converted into a tech learning center for kids named after Mr. LaGrange. And the best part? Not a single dollar goes to anyone with a clipboard and a superiority complex. Sometimes you have to take a hit to expose the liar. Sometimes the only way to light up the truth is to kill the power first. The power first.